For those that maybe weren't part of Agile Week last year, I did a presentation on what SAFe is, and I did a lunch and learn maybe about a month or two ago for SAFe itself. So I figured we'd take it one step further and discuss, within SAFe what PI planning is. But before we get there, I think everybody needs a little laugh every now and then, so it's healthy to laugh at oneself, especially when you can thank your mom for putting you in your first set of heels. So I will say hashtag dress up with mom day. But to get a little more serious to the present, I live with my husband, Luke. We've been together for 14 and a half years, and actually next month is our 9th wedding anniversary. We have our kiddos there, Max, the 7-year-old Frenchie, and Zoe, the going on 5-year-old Great Dane. Max is the troublemaker. Personally, aside from playing dodgeball, kickball, and softball, Luke and I try to go to Hawaii every year for our anniversary. This year we're going to Vegas, so I get to gamble for the first time in 9 years. I think you might be able to see behind me some of my Marvel stuff, maybe not if it's blurry, but I have a whole bunch of like Harry Potter and Marvel collectibles and things like that. I'm also certified Agile coach, Scrum Master, and certified in SAFe practitioner, which means I'm able to conduct training courses like SAFe for Teams, which includes executing the program increment, which we're going to talk about today at a high level. So when we get to PI planning, it's a 2-day planning session. And, so the agenda for that is, why are we here? What are the inputs and outputs to PI planning? PI planning event briefings, the team's product vision, the PI spotlights, team breakouts, and draft plan reviews. So I'd like to get into that a little bit. So why are we here? I'm one of those that I don't try to read off of a deck, word for word, but it's to have an alignment to a common mission. We are to gain commitment and alignment around a clear set of prioritized business objectives. PI planning is basically for companies of large number of teams, where SAFe is used to collaborate, synchronize, and align on the workflows, and a lot more than that. The ultimate goal of PI planning is to align teams strategically and collaboration among the teams enabled to where the business benefit at the end is that we establish face-to-face communication across all team members and stakeholders. We build a social network for the ART or Agile release train, depending on the alignment of development to the business goals, vision, team and program increment objectives, and also identifying dependencies and focusing on cross-team and cross-ART collaboration, which should provide the opportunity for just the right amount of architecture and lean user experience guidance, matching demand, each capacity, and eliminating excess work in progress. And for me, a successful PI planning event delivers 2 primary outputs: committed to PI objectives, a set of SMART objectives, which we'll get into what SMART means in a little while, that are created by each team with the business value designed by the business owners, and a program board, which highlights the new feature delivery dates, future dependencies among teams, and related milestones. So inputs and outputs of PI planning. So inputs are well-defined business context, the roadmap, vision, and the top 10 features of the program backlog. We'll get a little more into that in a few, but the outputs, on the other hand, like I said, is committed to objectives and that are done in a smart way, and also the program board. So when we talk about the product vision, what is a vision? It's basically a strategy, for example, to support the business realizing their ideas and our teams building amazing applications. An example I have here is creating a flywheel of support to enable the business to iterate on solving the most compelling problems while reducing noise and distractions. How do we achieve that? What are our goals? Pull out organization of operational debt. We facilitate development of process improvement. We support the development of business and technology roadmaps. And then how do we define our success? Success, creating transparency to collaborate and collaborative insight, increase venues for communication, improving the realization of the goal due to grooming. Which then always leads us to our spotlight. Spotlight is basically taking our features, and here are 3, for example, and then saying, at a very high level what they mean. So for our gas distribution and leak survey of my current client, it's meant for the surveyors of the gas pipeline who are responsible for gas leaks. This involves a 3-year leak survey. It is a work assignment and mobile documentation feature there where we use GPS and GIS maps to digitally record gas pipeline and survey completion and findings. So we're spotlighting here, like who this is for, what this is meant to do, and why we're meant to do that. Moving forward, it's there's I think there's sometimes a difference of opinion on the difference between a PI roadmap and a solution roadmap. So the PI or program increment roadmap is created before PI planning, and it's reviewed and updated by product management after PI planning is finished. And it usually covers 3 program increments: the current increment, which is work that's committed to; the next forecasted increment, which is planned work based on the committed to objectives; and the third increment after that for future work planned on forecasted objectives as well as budget. But what is a solution roadmap? A solution roadmap is actually a longer forecasting and planning term and tool for a specific product or service. It'll actually go and cover a few years at a time with more specific details for year 1, like quarterly features and capabilities, and more general information like objectives for year 2 and beyond. This is an example of what a roadmap would look like. So we have, for example, 2022 going through 2023 with PI program increment 5 through 6. And we have here what our enablers are. Enablers are people outside of the art that are going to help us be successful. We have our upper level epics, and the at the bottom, who's going to support us, kind of thing. So this goes across multiple PIs. This can just go across one PI. But this is a general roadmap that's for planning purposes that you would see if we were part of a PI planning itself. The process is, like I said, there's the input. We have to have the vision, we have to have the program backlog, and our top 10 features, which then informs us in PI planning to get the output of the team and program objectives and our program board. After we define that, we go to our first day of team breakouts. So in this breakout, the teams estimate their capacity for each iteration, which takes into account holidays, paid time off, PTO, things like that. That'll, say I can work on X amount over this amount of time, and I can't work on this amount of things because I'm out. But it also helps us identify what we need to realize for our features. Each team creates our draft plans, which are visible to everybody, iteration by iteration. The teams identify our risks and our dependencies and our, PI objectives. The objectives can include, committed to objectives that we know we're going to meet, and uncommitted to objectives, also known as stretch goals, that if we have the time to actually, work on them, we will do that. But they remain uncommitted just because we may not have, all of the risks and unknowns identified yet. So they're not necessarily extra things to do. It's just they're more that they are extra things to do if we have the time. They increase the reliability of the plan and give management itself an early, warning and indication that some of the goals that they may have might not be able to be delivered in that PI. The teams also add features and associated benefit dependencies with these uncommitted objectives as well. So aligning our mission with our PI objectives. So objectives are basically business summaries of what each team intends to deliver for the upcoming PI. They'll often map directly back to the features of the backlog, but not necessarily. So an example would be an aggregation of a set of features, a milestone like a trade show, an enabler feature supporting the implementation, like an outside team that'll help us, and major refactoring. So the objectives here, for example, are a structured location validation. I won't go through all these, but one of them could be, park at one building that requires parallel parking, reduce GPS signal loss by 25%. And then we have this uncommitted or stretch goal of, conduct hijack testing of the vehicle sensors. And this all relates back to, the electric and gas client that I work for. And when we talk about objectives, I mentioned earlier the SMART objectives. We try to use the SMART format, which means specific, measurable, achievable, realistic, and time-bound. So in this case, I will actually read these from the slides. So specific, state the intended outcome as simply, concisely, and explicitly as possible. Measurable, it should be clear what the team needs to do to achieve that objective. The measures can be descriptive, yes or no, quantitative, qualitative, or a range of things. Achievable, achieving the objective should be within the team's control and influence. So based on what we have for capacity, is it achievable? Realistic, can we actually, recognize the factors that cannot be controlled? For example, avoid the happy path assumptions and assume that we're not going to make the happy path. So is this realistic objective? And then time bound. So the time period for the achievement must be within the PI, and therefore all objectives must be scoped appropriately. So we'll go over sprint 1, will we start sprint 3 and end in sprint 6. So we have that time bound right there, so we can attach our capacity to each iteration to identify the backlog items we'll likely need to realize our features. So maintaining predictability with those uncommitted objectives, as I mentioned, these uncommitted objectives, help improve the predictability of delivering, business value. They're planned just in case we have time. They are not included in our commitment to management, and therefore making our commitment more reliable with what we actually commit to. If our team has a low confidence in meeting our existing PI objectives, we encourage them to move it to uncommitted so we feel more comfortable what we're committing to, as well as if we have anything that's unknown, consider it maybe moving it to uncommitted and put it in as like an early spike. And some companies will call this like a discovery. So you may hear spike, you may hear discovery, but be cognizant of the work that you're trying to accomplish, your capacity, and forecasted as well as historical, and make a decision on what you can actually commit to versus what you cannot commit to. So the team planning procedure, what do we do? What are we doing here? So we estimate the capacity for all of iterations. Like I said, we take into account our team size, PTO, holidays, etc. We review our program backlog items that our product owner should be working with our stakeholders on to also elaborate acceptance criteria and things like that. We identify our team backlog items, also as their sprint backlog, to look at all of our stories, user voice where applicable, other backlog items from another team that may be a dependency, and obviously estimate those in planning poker or Fibonacci, whatever you want to say. For example, 0, 1, 2, 3, 5, etc., and go from there. We identify any hard delivery or commitment dates that should be with our business owners. So what are we actually committing to? Almost like a milestone, but milestones don't necessarily exist in Agile, but we're trying to at least say, in a given PI, we expect to deliver this by the end of PI 3, which may have a date of October 31st, but it's just saying we're going to deliver within PI 3, sprint 3, not necessarily a specific date within sprint 3. We identify, discuss, and address interdependencies with other teams. I think there's always going to be a dependency on another team. For example, with us, it's architecture, it's SAP, that's built in directly to our app itself. So we always need to get commitment from those other teams that they will look at our dependencies at a specific sprint that we need them completed by and get their commitment for that. And then we load our stories, into Jira, for example, in our iterations 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and part of 6, with not going over our capacity. So if we know that each developer can only take on 5 user points, and we have 5 developers, we're not going to commit to over 5. We're not going to commit to over 25 story points in a specific sprint. This is where we then start to negotiate an agreement on our PI objectives, making them smart, and having the business owners help define the business value. So we have these committed to objectives, and say we have one team, and we'll call them the gas team, and we have those 10 features. Give us a business value, which is going to give you the biggest bang for your buck. That could be money, that could be compliance, that could be safety, things like that. So it doesn't always have to be a monetary thing that gives you is a biggest business value. We finish up with identifying our impediments and risks. So is it local to the team to resolve, or is it at the program level that we have to discuss later on when we present our plan to everybody? Some of the considerations I like to take for PI planning is before we start, there's a few things to bear in mind. Commitment matters, and it's not just from your tech lead that can sometimes, everybody looks to and for advice, and they just want the tech lead to say, this is what needs to be done, the order which it needs to be done. This needs to be collaborative from everybody. Don't plan to complete our objectives in the final sprint of the PI. Usually that 6th sprint is meant for carryover work. Is also going to have your next PI planning. So it really is about a week's worth of time versus a normal 2 weeks. Regionalization. What are we expecting to have work done in this PI for some of the teams? Make sure we're accountable for all that work and all the plans that we're committing to. And then this is an example of SAP, so I'll skip that. Then we get to our draft plan review for day one. It's a draft plan. This is where we talk about our velocity or capacity and our load that we're building into Jira, for example. We show an example of what our program board looks like. We have our draft PI objectives that we've committed to and not committed to, our dependencies, and our program risks and dependencies. And this is where teams present our planning outputs, which could be capacity and load. Product management and other teams and other stakeholders will review this agenda, this draft plan, and provide input that we then take into day two, where we start our day with planning adjustments, the day two team breakouts, our final plan review, discussing program risks and ownership, taking a confidence vote, what does that mean, and a retrospective of PI planning as a whole. Some of the planning adjustments that we talk about could be scope, people, resources. So we could have a risk that says, an alignment on maps correction. We have a map that shows this, but maybe through political whatevers, the town limits, change locations. So we have to get alignment on that and what kind of adjustments need to be made. So those are the kind of things that we need to take into account that we get back from our stakeholders. So our breakout session for day two. This is where our team continues to plan based on our agenda from the previous day. We make our appropriate adjustments. We finalize our objectives for the PI. Our business owners circulate and assign our business values in a final manner to our objectives from low to high, 1 to 10. And we have our objectives as business summaries of what the team intends to deliver in the upcoming PI. And they usually and should relate to the feature in the backlog, but can also include some important milestones, enable features that support the implementation or major refactoring. Teams finalize the program increment plan, consolidate program risks, impediments, and dependencies. And like I said, they also define our uncommitted objectives that provide the capacity and guard band needed to increase the reliability of the cadence-based delivery. Because they're not including commitment, they make commitment more reliable and help improve the predictability of delivering business value. And as a rule, if a team has doubts in a meeting of the PI objective, or the objective has many unknowns, let's move it to uncommitted or as a stretch goal. Final plan review. During this session, all the teams present their plans to the group. And at the end of each team's time slot, the team states their risks and impediments and provides the risks to our RTE, our release train engineer, also known as the Scrum Master of Scrum Masters, for use later in the roaming exercise, which we'll get to. The team asks our business owners if the plan is acceptable. If it is accepted, the team brings their PI objectives sheet in front of the rooms, and normally in front of a room nowadays, on a screen like this, to see the aggregate objectives unfold in real time. And at this point, if the business owners have any concerns, the teams are given the opportunity to adjust the plan as needed to address the issues that they've identified, and then they present their revised plan. So program risks and ownerships. I mentioned ROAM a minute ago. So what does ROAM mean? We have resolved, owned, mitigated, accepted. And I realize it should be ROM, but it's okay. So what does resolved mean? The teams agree that it's the issue or risk is no longer a concern. So we identified it early on, maybe day one, but now we've decided it's resolved. We already talked to the team, it's handled. Mitigated. Teams identify a plan to reduce the impact of that item or risk. So what are we doing from a mitigation perspective to ensure this doesn't affect our team and our committed to objectives in a negative manner? We have owned, which is where someone on the team or at the program level takes ownership of the item since it can't be resolved over the course of these 2 days. And then there's just accepted. Some of these things are just facts and it's going to happen and we have to understand that it's going to happen and we accept it. And we try to have risk mitigation in that regard. This will take us to our confidence vote from a team level. So once the program risks have been identified, our teams vote on their confidence in meeting the committed to objectives. Each team basically conducts what's called a fist of 5 votes. And if the average is 3 fingers or above, management should accept the commitment. If it's less than 3, the team reworks the plan Any person voting, 2 or fewer should be given an opportunity to voice their concerns in a collaborative manner. And this might add to the list of risks, which requires some replanning, as I mentioned, or simply just maybe informative. And then once the team is voted, the process once the team is voted again, the process is repeated for the entire hour until everyone has expressed their confidence in the collective plan. So we have, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I've generally seen things go from a 3.5 to a 4. There's always some 5s in there, but rarely does everybody say we're going to hit everything. There's no risks and things like that. And then lastly, we have our retrospective. So this isn't a retrospective like coming to the end of a sprint where it's 2 weeks. What did we do well? What did we do well? What can we improve upon? This is for the course of the whole 2 days. And it is the, what did we do well? What didn't go well? What can be improved? I take it from the perspective of the 4 L's, which is, what did we like over the last 2 days? What did we learn over the last 2 days? And that could be technical, that could just be informative. What did we lack over the last 2 days? So what could have helped us, perform better? And what is something that we longed for that, definitely would have made the last 2 days go much more smoothly? And with that one, that usually leads to action items for the next PI. For example, the longed for from the last 2 I've worked on were, why are we doing these on Thursday and Friday? And it took 2 PI plannings for RT to say, okay, let's move this to Tuesday and Wednesday because everybody doesn't want to stay on a call on a Friday until 8 o'clock at night. And now I finally understand why. So that was one of the action items that came out of our last retrospective. And then let's get on board. Let's move forward with SAFE. Let's move forward with PI planning. And I'll ask this time if anybody has any questions. I can't see if there's anything in chat.
Yes, actually, I have a question. What would you say are the key differentiators estimating this far out using this process as opposed to, say, waterfall? What should
I would say, waterfall, you'll have a 250, this is the way I will explain it when coaching. Waterfall, you have a 250-page requirements document, and we say we're budgeting $1 million for this, and we're going to say it needs to be done by, December 31st. Our developers go away in their own little cubes, own little silos, do their thing, and come back on December 31st and say, here you go. And the stakeholders say, actually, no, this is not at all what we wanted. And so then there becomes a lot of rework. There's change requests. There was asking for more budget, things like that. Whereas with SAFE or Agile in general, we are showing our stakeholders every 2 weeks the work that we've done, and we're setting expectations every 2 weeks so they know what's coming up, and they can tell us at that time during our every 2-week demo or review if they accept it, if something needs change, and we adjust our plan accordingly. So it's more real-time feedback versus going off for 6 months and coming back and saying, I don't like it.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'd also like to ask something. For the visual aid, what are the tools that are used to use for this PI planning to help organize?
Sure. So, generally, I use pretty much every client I've worked at. We've used Jira. There's also Microsoft MS, Microsoft Team Structure. There's also retro boards that can be used for like the retro board, but also to map out the program board itself. So there's a variety of different tools you can use. I find Jira to be the most overall encompassing because you can map out and see your features over the PIs, your objectives over the course of sprints. You can automatically put in your capacities. So if you are committing to too much, it kind of gives you a red flag and says, okay, hey, heads up, we said we wouldn't go over 25 and you're at 32. What do we need to adjust?
What is the minimum Jira version that you need to pay to have this kind of availability? Because for free or more basic versions, I think it's more difficult to have all the options for this.
I will openly admit I do not have an answer to what version is needed. I will admit
Maybe.
that I can find out. I'm happy to find out like what I use and what I've used in the past and get back to this group. But I can admit that I've not really focused on what version of Jira we've used to accomplish what I just mentioned.
No problem. And the last question of mine, I'd like to know if you have any templates that are shareable to register the risks, as you mentioned, for example, to have a control, the ones that were resolved, the ones that are owned and accepted.
Can you repeat the first part you kind of put out there? I'm sorry.
Once I received a template from a friend, similar to what you said, but it was on Excel. So people used this Excel tool to register and control the risks they were working on during the release.
Yeah.
So do you have any kind of tool like this to share?
I have that both ways, actually. One, you can put your risks and dependencies in Jira and do an export into Excel. But also within Jira, you can actually have an import function to where, based on a certain template, you put all your risks, dependencies, commitments, etc., into a template into Excel, import those into Jira, and it literally takes less than a second. I've never seen it take more than a second. And then you go into Jira and everything is there lined up for you.
No, thank you.
Sure. Well, sorry, that's my dog. I think my mother-in-law is here to see my husband. Hold on 1 second.
The sound has been filtered. Don't worry.
No, it's okay. He's a little overprotective. They both dogs just freak out when the door is knocked. At least it wasn't a Great Dane, because then he would have been deaf. I will say that.
Okay, so let me think that a way to put this.
Okay.
Thank you so much for your presentation. When you have the PI plannings, you have a lot of different teams working to collaborate and to create the PI planning, right? So you usually use the story points metrics, right, to estimate. And how can you, like, I don't know, leverage somehow the story points, the estimates, the teams does? Because I see that each team has its own feeling or perspective of effort. So
yeah, I mean, each team could be, you could have a team comprised of a junior developer, a senior developer, and a tech lead. You could have just, all senior developers. Each individual is going to have their own individual velocity. I can tell you right now, we have a junior developer that has a velocity of 5 over the last few sprints, and our tech lead is literally like 3 times his development perspective. So she's always pulling things in. Like, she will go well over 15 points. She'll go well over 20 points. And so when it comes to planning, it does make it a little more difficult. But we always have stuff ready for her to pull in, because she's seemingly every day ready to pull something in. So it is a team by team basis, usually based on skill set and how long they've been doing it, what they understand. But when it comes to pointing, it still should be a collaborative effort from the junior developers up to the tech leads. So if someone needs to pick it up, they understand the acceptance criteria, they understand the background, they understand what the risks and the unknowns are, and hopeful unknowns are. So they are comfortable with like that particular story point. No one has anything else. Thank you so much for joining. I appreciate your time. Hopefully you're able to, if you're able to take just one thing from this, I feel like it was a success. I'm always I'm attached to my phone, like to the point where I get yelled at all the time. So if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me. Happy to get a Google Meet, happy to have a Google chat and answer some questions. So I'm readily available for anybody that joined this or anybody that's watching this recording right now.